Well, we have 6 children. The 2 youngest are showing long patterns of selfishness, unwillingness to repent. We told them that this year they are not going to be visited by Santa. I was really hoping that keeping them home from school and wiping the floorboards would really bring pain. And it wasn't painful for them. It's because they're so numb.
If your kid came to you on fire, would you say, I'm just gonna love you where you are right now? No, you throw them on the ground and you start rolling them. You get a blanket and you start hitting the flames. And they're gonna say, you're hurting me, you're beating me, you're controlling. It's like, no dear, hold still, I'm getting the fire out. Pain is meant to be a teacher. It's your ally.
Roger. 735 is a 15-minute ETS of 0. 40.
Police say this is the house a young child escaped from and went to a neighbor's house asking for food and water.
Mother of 6 children and a momfluencer.
On August 31st, I turned on the TV to see Ruby Franke, a disgraced YouTuber with over 2 million subscribers and 1 billion views at her zenith, being arrested in southern Utah on 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. At the time of me recording this, she's still being held without bail.
Miss Franke, can you hear me?
Yes.
Some of you might recognize Ruby from when I discussed 8 Passengers on this channel back in 2020. A once significant pillar of the family vlogging community, 8 Passengers became the subject of severe scrutiny when a litany of unflattering moments made their way outside of their intended audience.
If you cut one more thing, I'm going to take the scissors and I'm going to cut its head off.
Drop and give me 10. You're gonna lose the privilege to eat dinner.
When Ruby and her husband Kevin uploaded their last video in January of 2022, the 8 Passengers YouTube channel lay dormant and untouched for over a year until being mysteriously deleted just a few weeks prior to the arrest, almost as if Ruby knew something was coming.
It might be 5 years, 10 years. I might even take it to the grave with me. My dirty little secret.
But she isn't the only villain in our story here.
Jodi Hildebrandt?
Yes.
Jodi Hildebrandt is an author, life coach, and somehow licensed therapist who once possessed quite a bit of influence in the Mormon church, being recommended by Mormon bishops to counsel thousands of clients over her decades of professional practice, if we want to completely undercut the definition of professional, because Jodi's highly contested methods of treatment and blatant disregard for basic ethics have made her quite the polarizing figure to nearly everyone familiar with her, though Ruby didn't see her that way, and recruited Jodi to counsel those in the Franke family before finally joining her as a business partner around 2021, abandoning the vlogging career that made her such an icon to instead educate the masses on parenting as a certified mental fitness trainer, whatever the hell that's supposed to be. Join me in documenting the updated saga of Ruby and Jodi's trajectory of once ruining the lives of everyone around them to now sleeping in a cold hard cell of a jailhouse literally called Purgatory. I'm not making that up, that is actually the name. And if I'm being honest, it's a pretty ironic place for someone like Ruby to end up. The Frankes embodied the idealistic image of a happy, all-American family on their channel, with their children being the biggest drawing point. Archived screenshots indicate that almost every single title and thumbnail centered on the kids to some degree or another, making content out of their illnesses, injuries, and embarrassing moments, even when the children didn't want the audience seeing it.
Julie has been asking all summer if she can shave her legs and armpits. So there's a lot of hair in there, actually.
Mom, don't show that.
And who can blame them? You don't know who all is watching this stuff.
In fact, there's an analytic that you can look at and it shows you, like, when people search your name, the things that they search with. And Sherry Franke period is one of the top 5 most searched things with my name, and I haven't even mentioned it.
As it's clear now that the comment sections in particular were never the greatest source of encouragement to their eldest daughter Sherry, whose face I will no longer be censoring since she's an adult now, has made an effort to get as far away from her mother as possible, speaking openly about the ways in which daily vlogging has affected her self-esteem. It got to a point where for years on end, Sherry would obsess over what the viewers thought about her, what people were typing down below below each video weighed on her in a way that no child should ever be burdened with.
Did that ever get hard, being in the limelight all the time?
Yeah, it got hard. I feel like as I got older, people got like meaner in the comments. They would say things like, she's just gonna grow up, become a baby making machine. Like,
wow. Oh my gosh.
Just because she's a member of the church. And so there was a lot of attack on that.
At
religion.
13.
Yeah.
How did that affect you as a young kid?
I found myself, like, I would tell myself, it doesn't matter what they say. Like, I know how I feel about myself. And I think I believed that for a while.
Yeah.
But I always would find myself just, like, checking comments on Instagram, on YouTube, just to see what people had said about me.
Yeah.
Whether it be good or bad, you feel like it was okay.
I just wanted to, like, be aware of what people were saying, I guess. And that probably got to, like, an unhealthy point where I was just checking all the time. And even through college, sometimes I've had to just, like, check and check and check. And,
really?
Yeah.
But as Sherry describes it, she got used to this. She adjusted to having every trip to the supermarket and doctor's office documented online for profit because she had no choice.
We took a camera when we'd go on vacations. We'd film going to the store. We'd just, like, always kind of film everything. But over the years, like, I got used to it more. It's like, yeah, this is like our job. This is how we pay for vacations. This is how we get to do fun stuff. You don't love it every day, but you do it because it's work.
This was a mandatory round-the-clock job with no fixed hours or salaries for the Franke children. And while they may have been generating seven-figure profits for their parents, making it possible for them to take nice trips and live in a big house, the rigidity of their daily lives made it difficult to enjoy any of those privileges. They'd take trips to vlog them. They'd have nice rooms to vlog in. They'd put food on the table for Ruby to deprive them of.
My kids are literally starving. I hesitate to say this because it's gonna sound like I'm like a mean barbarian, but I told the kids, I said, I'm not even gonna let you eat breakfast until you get your chores done.
Stop crying or I'm gonna have you go upstairs and you won't have any breakfast.
Can you give me some breakfast?
You don't need food.
You know, it's bad when there are multiple clips out there of a parent withholding food from their children and defending it as a necessary disciplinary tactic. In one infamous clip, Ruby describes dinner as a privilege, and in another, she refuses to bring lunch to her then 6-year-old daughter at school, since it is her responsibility to prepare her own lunch. Never mind the fact that she's a literal kindergartner, she screwed up. So let's pray she learns her lesson and that nobody else gives her food, right?
I just got a text message from Eve's teacher, and she said that Eve did not pack a lunch today, and can I bring a lunch over to the school? I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, so the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry, and hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
I think you can see why Ruby's in jail right now. I mean, these clips just go on.
I had just had Russell and Julie was just crying a lot and whiny, and one day I looked at her and I'm like, you just stink. She had like peed her pants or something, and it was just because she was being neglected, because I was totally paying attention to the new baby.
Last night she was up all night. I heard her getting into the freezer to get ice cubes at around 2 in the morning, and I could hear her whimpering and crying, and then at 4 in the morning she came and got in bed with me, and she was just kind of whimpering. And don't you hate it when your kid is sick but they don't have a fever until after the whining starts? I just thought the whining was because she was manipulating. Not true. She's not feeling well. For being in town.
But you yelled at me.
Shh. The fact that I yell at my kids is a secret. We don't want our viewers to know. That never happens in my house. I never yell. Sometimes I've wondered if I should, like, you know, get rid of my kids.
I would not object.
No, you want me to send you away. Sherry's like, oh no, don't hate me.
Give me to a new owner.
About a year ago, my daughter was saying her prayers. Eve, she was 6 years old at the time. And she was saying her prayers, and she said the cutest thing. I thought it was so cute. And I started laughing. She said, "Dear Heavenly Father, please help me to survive."
And I thought it was so cute, and it just took me off guard, and I kind of giggled a little. That was an experience for her, and she melted. She melted. She was angry.
But these moments only began to circulate after this video, where her eldest son Chad, who is also an adult now, shared to their audience that Ruby fully took away his bed as punishment for pranking his brother, being forced to sleep on a beanbag chair for 8 months straight at 15 years old.
My bedroom was taken away for 7 months, and then you give it back like a couple of weeks ago.
I don't think our viewers know that. You've been sleeping on a beanbag.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago. Oh, I'll give you the reason why I lost my bedroom.
No, we never told our viewers.
That I woke Russell up at 2 in the morning and told him that we're going to Disneyland and he has to pack.
Do you think it's funny? Because
and then I walk out.
If you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
This is what initially prompted many of those outside of their community to begin combing through their prior body of work, shining a light on further concerning admissions, like when their 6-year-old daughter left her jacket at school and was excluded from the family ski trip.
So the reason why Eve did not go skiing with us was because she left her ski coat at school. And over the Christmas break before New Year's, they took everything from the lost and found and took it to donate. And Eve said, well, that's okay, just buy me a new one. Just buy me a new ski coat. I said, that is a very entitled attitude.
Or the time Sherry had a medical emergency where she was losing her vision and Ruby stalled for over an hour before taking her to the hospital because she needed to first get ready.
And so she woke up this morning and she's like, Mom, my vision is really blurry, like more blurry than it usually is. Kevin just came in and he's like, I think we need to take Sherry to the emergency room. I said, well, let me take a shower and then I'll be out. It's been an hour, so I'm cleaning the sink, I'm cleaning the countertops, mopping the floor. I'm stalling. I think I'm ready now. I think I'm ready to leave. I put on a little bit of lip gloss and that will be as much stalling as I'll go.
Ruby having to whip out the vlog cam and keep us all up to speed when her kid is literally in the next room going blind for some reason tells you a lot about who we're dealing with. This is someone who sent 14-year-old Chad to a troubled teens wilderness camp out in Arizona against his will, and then had the nerve to milk the entire situation for all the clicks and ad revenue she could. In response to all of this backlash though, I remember Ruby and Kevin citing a therapist their family had been seeing, almost as a way to absolve themselves of any possible wrongdoing on their end because all of their actions were being approved by a trained specialist.
And the things that we show and share and the things that many of you are criticizing and calling abusive are actually things that mental health professionals have counseled us to do.
Basically, we as the viewers no longer needed to worry because a professional was finally on the case.
I had a phone call yesterday with my therapist and she taught me about truth and distortion. Mom probably talks about Jodi all the time, but
I've mentioned Jodi a few times. She has a podcast called Connections with an X.
But if you ask me, any professional who has to resort to begging their clients for positive reviews like this, it probably isn't worth seeing.
We've put the link on the bottom of every single post. So all you have to do is click the link and give us a 5-star review. That's as simple as it is. But you guys aren't doing it. I think we've had 5 people from the last time I asked, which was probably a month ago. 5 out of almost 9,000. 5 people give us a review. That's 5. And we've had probably 50 to 75 people give us 1-star reviews. So we started with a 5, and in 3 months we're down to like a 2.
Okay, so what does that say about your practices, I wonder?
There is a link underneath every single video that says, give us a review. Click it and give us a 5-star, please. I don't understand why you won't do it.
This woman is in her 50s and she's throwing a temper tantrum like she's 3. Reminds me of the time Ruby lost her mind at her kids listening to secular music at school.
The teacher is going to have all of the students do a TikTok dance. And I said, a TikTok dance? I said, what songs are in this? And I looked it up to look up the lyrics. It is straight up hardcore porn. Straight up. It's all lustful. It's all suggestive. It's all seductive. It's all perverse.
I'm sure you're wondering at this point, what's the song, Aubrey? Well, I was wondering that too. Unfortunately, Ruby doesn't come out and name it herself, but she does mention it was used in a commercial for the grocery store Smith's. So naturally, I looked that up and discovered the song in question to be Low by Flo Rida, Apple Bottom Jeans. I mean, I'm pretty sure everyone on the planet has heard it before. A song that's not only consistently played on the radio, I think the most I'd ever listened to it was when I was 7 years old.
Nowhere in here was the school or the teacher being protective of these children's innocence. No one was trying to look out for what was best for these kids.
So starvation and lack of privacy is totally okay, but part of a Flo Rida song is where we draw the line. Good to know.
So I went in and I had an appointment with the principal and I said, you approved this song that has all of these lyrics in it. And she says, well, we're not dancing to those lyrics. It's just a portion. If it's agreeable to the public at large, then it's okay in the school. And I said, that's really disappointing. You, the principal, who are supposed to be bringing morality and supposed to be a standard, who have these precious children, you are not protecting them. You are not protecting them. You are introducing them to the world, and you're saying it's okay. You're saying that you support this.
I have consumed countless hours of Ruby Franke content, and I have never once seen her get more emotional than when she's talking about a song featured in the 2011 PG movie Zookeeper.
I said, you will answer for what you brought into this school and expose these children to. And she says, yeah, I will, and I'm fine with it. I am 100% fine with what I've chosen. I'm like, that's sick.
Clearly, Ruby is just as well adjusted as her bestie, Jodi. And as we're about to see, mixing these two is like throwing gasoline on a grease fire.
Anyone who comes and objects and says, hey, this isn't appropriate, are deemed a Karen. Now, Karen is a new term for Jodi.
I didn't know what that meant.
That's because she doesn't have bratty high school children who turn around and call their moms Karens when held accountable. But a Karen is a derogatory term used towards mothers who hold their kids accountable.
Before we really introduce Jodi, I do want to go ahead and thank today's sponsor, Rocket Money. Rocket Money is an all-in-one finance platform that helps you save more and spend less, allowing you to manage your subscriptions, lower your bills, build a custom budget, and grow your savings all in one place. Because I mean, these days, it can be easy to lose track of your subscriptions, and apparently I was paying $55 a year for a photo editing app that I didn't even know about until just now. I mean, how did that even happen? But with Rocket Money, you can discover and cancel unwanted subscriptions anytime with just a tap. Automatically monitor your spending by category, get notifications when you've exceeded them, and visualize your spend to earn ratio by month, quarter, or year. So you won't get stuck paying nearly $60 for Pixar. I mean, seriously, how did I let that happen? Now I'm mad at myself. You can even monitor your credit and set up smart savings, which lets Rocket Money automatically deposit savings into a smart savings account for you. It's simple to use and you can withdraw at any time. Start saving today when you click the link down below or go to rocketmoney.com/Jobbery and join the 3.4 million members who have already signed up. It helps the channel and it's free, so why not give it a shot? Huge thanks again to Rocket Money for making this video possible. Jodi Hildebrandt was born in Salt Lake City, Utah in 1969. Raised in a strong conservative household, Jodi was taught to follow the teachings of the LDS Church from a young age. She got her bachelor's degree at Brigham Young University in '96 and her master's in psychology at the University of Utah in 2003. Over the next few years, Jodi worked as a program director at a drug rehabilitation center in Orem. The experiences she had here would greatly go on to shape the curriculum and structure of her own program she later founded by the name of Connections, which she spelled like a shitty rap name. While Jodi's LinkedIn places her at Connections Classroom as early as 2007, the company's official website states she didn't actually found it until 2012. And even then, it wasn't a registered LLC until 2018, so the true origin of this thing is still a little fuzzy. Complicated even more by the fact that this 15-year-old interview I found indicates that by 2008, Jodi was managing Utah County's chapter of Lifestar, Star, a program designed to help sex addicts work through recovery. Now, why Jodi's LinkedIn fails to mention the time she spent at Lifestar, I have no idea. This was a pretty significant period of her career, considering it's around the time she literally lost her license.
She mentioned that she was basically doing this higher duty to the world, this higher service, if you will, and that she was punished by society, you know, in the light of like taking her licensing away.
According to this 2012 article from the Salt Lake City Tribune, Jodi was reprimanded by the Utah Division of Professional Licensing, or DOPL, for discussing a patient with LDS church leaders and a Brigham Young University without the patient's permission. Her license was put on probation for 18 months, effective January 25th of that year. While anonymous at the time, this patient was later revealed to be Adam Paul Steed, a prominent Mormon whistleblower who has spoken at great length about his time with Jodi. As the official DOPL order states, from 2008 to 2010, Jodi repeatedly discussed private details about Adam and his wife with their LDS clergy and other mental health therapists without having signed authorization, and in 2009, spoke about Adam to the Honor Code office at BYU. Adam explains that despite Jodi spreading false information about him, these rumors still resulted in him losing privileges at the church and even being ejected as a student from BYU. According to him, Jodi sought to ruin his reputation after he refused counseling for a sex and porn addiction he didn't have.
She didn't want me to leave her therapy group. It was thousands of dollars a month. I couldn't go to any other therapist. I was trying to go to other therapists because they were saying I was an addict in denial. And, you know, it was just crazy. Jodi, in her group, she said that if you had to spend time not thinking about something, just the fact that you had to not think about it meant you were an addict.
A recurring theme we'll see of Jodi is that she tends to create or exacerbate problems so that her patients must continue to rely on her for treatment. For example, one of her core philosophies is that everyone has an addiction of some kind, though truthfully, Adam had only seen about 2 hours worth of porn in his entire life at that point. Plus, that's not even why he came to her in the first place. He and his wife only wanted marriage counseling. So of course he didn't want to keep paying Jodi $2,000 a month for a type of therapy he hadn't signed up for. As he insists, we came there for marriage counseling and she pulled us into her porn marathon. She hardly spent any time knowing about my life. She didn't want to talk about my personal goals or my progress. She would only threaten me that if I didn't take more sessions and have my wife take more sessions, the alleged addiction would destroy my life. Yet, as he alleges, it was Jodi who ended up destroying his life in the end, successfully painting him as some kind of dangerous addict in front of the church and ripping his family apart from the inside, telling NBC that she weaponized his experience as a victim of child sexual abuse against him. Jodi was blaming everything on me being a sexual addict. She was saying that every time I said I was a victim of sexual abuse, that was my addiction speaking. So if I had PTSD and trauma and I mentioned it, they would confront me that was my addiction of sexual abuse. As stated in the article, Adam believed his ex-wife began feeling like she had to protect herself and their children from him, thanks to Jodi's counseling. And despite constantly accusing him of having serious mental health problems, Jodi never actually diagnosed Adam with anything.
And now she was saying I was mentally unhealthy and I couldn't choose for myself because of how unhealthy I was. I couldn't choose to go to another therapist. This was my addiction working to not receive the confrontation that she had. And, you know, she just, y'all, this is just so hard to talk about. Like, I'm trying to give a condensed, quick version without sharing all these dramatic files that are the complete evidence of who this lady is and what she is.
As a result of admitting to such unethical behavior, Jodi was required to spend the next year and a half meeting 22 conditions or have her license be permanently suspended. This included working under a DOPL supervisor who would video or audio tape at least one clinical session a month and review 20% of her patient files. Throughout each probation interview, though, Jodi was found to be in total compliance with her stipulation. And by 2013, the board reviewed her essay and felt felt it was done very well. So by June 27th, 2013, her probation had ended and her license was officially reinstated. Which is just such a nice and dandy way to end this story, wouldn't you say? Unfortunately though, you can no longer request Jodi services as she just surrendered her license from jail, so I'm sorry you missed your chance. But to get an idea of how amazing she was, why don't we hear what some of her reviews have to say? This one from an entire decade ago writes, several professionals and peers have serious concerns with Jodi Hildebrandt. She has been described as combative by her peers. Indeed, in our case, where no pornography is involved, Jodi has drawn other erratic and erroneous relationship conclusions. Very unprofessional. Or this one from 8 years ago. She has intentionally exposed very confidential information to third-party persons, even including my family information that was not to be shared. She does this for personal and monetary gain. She's very unprofessional, has no tact nor integrity. She cannot be trusted. From 6 years ago, I am very concerned with the unprofessional tactics used by this therapist. Her treatment is a slippery slope of its own. If you've had a relatively strong and healthy marriage, stay away from her shame-based treatment. 4 years ago, Miss Hildebrandt brainwashed my wife that I had an addiction when I did not. My wife was so certain I was hiding something as a result of this woman's lies that we had to go to an honest counselor to help dispel this dishonesty that this woman has told my wife. Do not go to this woman. Another one from 4 years ago. She is not a good person. I went to one of her Connections 101 classes because my wife has a friend who likes her, but after the class I looked her up and saw the review saying that her license was on probation. After that I called her and asked for a refund. $270 for the classes I wouldn't be attending, because someone should not have to continue to pay for a counselor for undelivered services when they learn that the counselor has acted illegally. She did not respond. I emailed her in their office, but they did not respond. I did the same thing 2 more times, and they still have not answered my emails and voicemails. I think I will have to get the police or attorneys involved to get my refund. 3 years ago. I can't believe this woman is still in practice. I have never met anyone so manipulative and so projecting of their own issues. I have recently come to realize that several other people's marriages all ended in a similar fashion while under her control. I suggest you see literally anyone else. 1 year ago, I told her I suspected I had Asperger's syndrome and she flat out told me I was wrong. Come to find out, I do. If she had listened to me and been willing to work with me on getting a diagnosis, I could have saved a lot of pain and heartache. Another one from last year, she sets her clients up to depend on her so that she can keep collecting your money. She isolates her clients by setting up unrealistic expectations so they believe all of their friends and family are toxic, leaving them to only depend on her and her support phone calls. Needless to say, this woman plays God.
We're also hearing from another former client who says this is just the beginning.
He believes a lot more former clients will come forward with their stories of both shame and isolation.
Warner claims Hildebrandt would use shaming tactics to turn husbands and wives against each other, adding that she would convince men that their impure thoughts made them dangerous to their families.
There was a man that had successful business that believed that he was a danger to his wife and his family because he did a double take. Like if he saw a beautiful woman, he would see and he'd look again. This guy got his own apartment and separated from his family because he was a danger.
In some cases, Warner claims husbands were separated from their families for so long, they were considering suicide.
I think you can probably get a sense of how controversial she is. Despite being a member of the official LDS Family Services referral list, a Rolodex of therapists and counselors specifically approved by the Mormon Church, the whole reason Adam ever came into contact with Jodi in the first place was when his Mormon bishop referred her.
I had just finished a settlement case with Boy Scouts of America, and then immediately afterwards, my bishop asked me to go to Jodi Hildebrandt with my wife.
Jodi Hildebrandt, despite all the baggage she carries, was being routinely recommended as a reliable counselor by the Church of Latter-day Saints, and that is a huge problem.
We ended up going to our church bishop. The church bishop recommended Jodi.
Many of the people in my group, and I would say probably almost 100%, they were married. And through the LDS church referrals.
This was in the last couple of years, right?
It was 2020. So we got married in April of 2021, and the first couple months didn't go very smoothly. And that's when we went to go see Jodi. I would say my estimation would be October. I could pull it up on my phone. I have a text from her, but...
Not only have a number of her victims reported meeting Jodi through their bishops, but Jodi's own niece, who was once in charge of overseeing her billing, has alleged Jodi to be on the church's payroll at least before she lost her license.
I did her billing, and she would bill the church, and so, every client, essentially,
I would say like the vast majority of her clients were from bishop recommendations, just based off of the billing that I would do for her.
Because in the Mormon Church, if somebody can't afford a therapist, tithes and offerings might be used by the bishop who recommends his ward members to Jodi. He would then foot the bill. So the Mormon Church was funding Jodi Hildebrandt's wealth and success and power.
Additionally, ex-Mormon YouTubers Jordan and McKay have gone further into voicing some of their concerns for this dynamic as well.
In a lot of situations, the bishop, if he deems it necessary, he can refer families or couples out to family and couples counseling that the church will pay for, but they will only pay for a couple of visits, and it has to be one of those therapists that's on that LDS Family Services referral list.
But it also comes down to what we call bishop roulette. And so it really just kind of depends on the bishop. Like some of them are like, yeah, go to a licensed professional. Don't care who it is. Here's the money. We'll pay for it. And some of them are like, no, LDS therapist only. Like there's no real like rigidity in what they're allowed to do.
Let's not even mention the just ethical nightmare that is turning the church into the payer.
Yes. Yeah.
The oh my god, like the second you said like they'll pay for some of it, my heart seized. That is Ethics 101. If the payer has an agenda, then it's gonna bleed into the treatment.
If your bishop refers you to a therapist, then it's safe to assume you will be getting treatment in line with the church. Which sure, it doesn't always have to be a bad thing, but a therapist mixing their personal spirituality with their practice is generally something to absolutely avoid, as this can often create way more problems than it solves. At least according to psychology PhD and host of the Mormon Stories podcast, John DeLynn.
Scrupulosity is a classic form of OCD, which is religious OCD, where hyper-religiosity or hyper-rumination about worthiness and about righteousness can be its own form of OCD. So if you go to an OCD client who's got scrupulosity and you tell them, look, you just need to remember that you're a child of God and study the scriptures and pray more. They may be praying 4, 5, 6 hours a day. They may be reading the scriptures 4, 5, 6 hours a day. They may be having ruminations constantly about their worthiness. And if you start putting pressure on them about other thoughts they need to be having to just magically cure themselves from their OCD by just remembering you're a child of God, you can actually exacerbate their ruminations instead of neutralize them and help them.
And to give you an idea of who they would and wouldn't recommend, here is former LDS sex therapist Natasha Helfer talking about being removed from the referral list for not buying into the church's unfounded view on masturbation and being gay.
Because I was public about my stances that are parallel to the American Pediatric Association, the American Psychological Association, that something like masturbation or being gay are parts of normative human development and sexual behavior and identity, I was off-listed of the Mormon bishops list. LDS Family Services wouldn't refer to me anymore. And yet you have on the regular here in the state of Utah, Mormon bishops, part of why they're being referred to is because they're not going to have those sex positive and clinically sound stances.
According to Spencer Tibbetts, who attended Jodi's sessions as a teenager, Jodi reportedly told him that if he didn't accept the Mormon God, he would never be able to get help from therapy. This, of course, was after Jodi moved him out of the children's group and into her men's group so he could have more in-depth discussions on porn addiction with grown men who had been separated from their wives due to their tendencies. Even though Spencer had originally been sent to Jodi for having an extra phone to play video games on, at that point he didn't even know what porn was. But that didn't stop Jodi from putting him in a support group where grown men would openly describe incest fantasies to him.
Hearing that she treated you with adults who had porn addiction and spoke openly about those kinds of things, as well as fantasies that should never be mentioned in front of a 16-year-old. What were some of those sessions like for you as a 21-year-old now looking back at your 16-year-old self?
All of the conversations that I had, it was a 45-minute call every day for a few weeks with a different person each time. As an adult looking back at that now, it's horribly disturbing. I can't imagine answering the phone and hearing a squeaky little kid's voice and being like, yeah, I have a I have a porn addiction.
Countless testimonies seem to indicate clients were having their lives actively worsened by the treatment Jodi offered in the form of in-person meetings, a private Facebook group, and public videos she posted online with, oh, hey, look at that, we know her.
Welcome back to Connections. I'm Jodi Hildebrandt.
And I'm Ruby Franke.
It's unclear when exactly Ruby first came into contact with Jodi, but she would occasionally name drop her in the later years of 8 Passengers in reference to the treatment her son Chad was receiving. As we know, at least both he and Ruby's own brother Bo had been going to her. Of course, Bo's experience wasn't the same as Ruby's though, judging by a review he left a year ago stating, "I am very concerned that what I've shared gets gossiped about among others. I've scheduled an appointment that was canceled without informing me. Jodi ignores my request for a receipt of services." So while not everyone in Ruby's family may have been on board with Jodi, this didn't stop her from joining her in videos and attending seminars, as evident by these old videos of Kevin dancing on stage with Jodi.
And I learned how to get along, and so you're back from outer space. I just walked in to find you here without that look upon your face. Weren't you the one who tried to hurt me with goodbye? You think I'd crumble? You think I'd lay down and die? Oh no, I will survive. Oh, as long as I know how to love, I know I'll stay alive.
Sorry, but I couldn't not include that. Eventually, though, Ruby and Jodi became full-time business partners as Ruby began slowing down content uploaded to 8 Passengers, transforming her original Instagram into @MomsOfTruth, and losing followers every time she posted videos and infographics to promote Connections. But I doubt this mattered much, because to her, sharing wisdom to countless parents through Connections Classroom was far more important than anything else she was doing before. Plus, she wanted to save her kids or something.
You wonder where I've been on my vlogs? You wonder why I left YouTube? It's to save my kids. No amount of money. I'm telling you, I was making millions. And I left it because my kids were being hurt. With entitlement, they were being hurt with people's advice, and they didn't have a mother up the front saying, I don't care what the world's opinion is, this is the truth and this is where I stand. And fortunately, I had a chance. I had them in my home long enough to do it, and I'm not gonna lose them.
It was also around this time that people began to speculate on Ruby's marriage, wondering if her husband Kevin had left the picture at this point. Their separation would later be confirmed by Kevin's lawyer, stating he had officially moved out of the house by late 2022 and thus lost contact with the children, but we'll get into all of that later. First, it's important to understand the core pillars of Connections largely rely on the words truth and distortion. According to Jodi, it's important to rid yourself of distortion in order to give yourself a life in the truth. Which is obviously a very loaded statement, because what do those terms mean, and how are we defining any of this? Well, to Jodi, distortion can loosely refer to any of the following. Addiction, which ranges from anything as innocuous as exercise or driving to more severe cases like drugs or alcohol. To Jodi, nearly anything can count as an addiction. You can even be addicted to receiving compliments by her definition.
When I first came to Connections, my very first thought was, I don't belong here. I don't belong here because this is a support group for people who look at porn, sex addicts, things like that. But that's not me. I'm not an addict. But I learned through my experience, I had so many addictions. I was addicted to work. I was addicted to sports. I was addicted to my phone. Everybody who's listening to this conference today, you are an addict. You are an addict. You are addicted to at least one thing, whether it's food, the mirror, whether it's your body appearance, fitness, your phone, video games, sports. You are addicted to something, and all of that is I'd be willing to bet money that you're making those choices to feel better about yourself because of the generational distortions that we've discussed today.
Distortion can also mean you're living in shame or denial, being codependent in your relationship, living in lust, or being controlling and manipulative of others. It's also important to note that Jodi believes everyone is living in distortion to some degree or another, but that she possesses the power to help you overcome distortion and live a life in truth instead. In order to achieve truth, you must develop 3 core principles: impeccable honesty, humility, and rigorous personal responsibility. And as long as you dedicate yourself to these principles of truth, you will absolutely find happiness and joy.
life coaching, therapy, meditation groups, whatever modality you're going to, that you're not finding peace. If you are willing to come and learn about principles of truth and actually willing to humble and choose to be responsible and choose to be honest, you will find calmness. This sounds so, kind of like, hey, you do this and you'll have joy. And the truth is, if you actually do live principles of truth, you will have the fruit of joy.
Yes.
You will. So if you're trying to engage in distortion and still find joy, you will not be successful. It won't matter where you go. You must be willing to choose principles of truth, which is learning how to be honest, responsible, and humble. And there's many other principles, like be compassionate, know how to clean up your side of the street. Another word for that is repent. How to forgive, how to be long-suffering, how to be patient, how to be truly kind and genuine and sincere. These are all principles of truth.
Now, if that doesn't make any sense, that's fine. It doesn't. Most of this is just word soup anyway. We'll see the actual material effect of this curriculum play out pretty soon. But the most important thing to remember right now is that Jodi considers these principles to be absolute truths. Jodi, as stated in her book, markets herself as having heavenly instruction from God himself to heal your problems. And she markets Connections Classroom as the ultimate objective guide to living a happy life, making her program out to be superior to any other counseling service on the market.
Anything that you think, anything that you feel, anything that you choose to engage in behaviorally, such as putting something into your body, it is your responsibility to assess all of that for, is this truthful? Is this honest? Is this responsible? And am I being humble? Am I open? Am I curious?
But the problem here is that not everyone has the same definition of what is responsible or humble or open or curious. These are such vague terms, it's hard to know what we're talking about here. I don't know how this is meant to be useful to anyone.
You gotta use the right tools to go after false beliefs. I recommend an axe of truth. So you see all these weeds? See all these tributaries? See how they all go up? You see what a tangled mess that is? These are all your distortions. There's hundreds of them shooting off from this one root structure. And the root structure is your core belief. Core beliefs. Look at a mess these core just got dirt in my eye.
Most of the Connections curriculum comes across more antagonizing than anything else, though. If you want an example, look no further than Ruby and Jodi's perspective on ADHD. This is a longer clip from one of their meetings, but I think it's important you hear as much of it as you can.
There's no ADHD, just extreme irresponsibility. And she was choosing to be extremely irresponsible, super manipulative. And I didn't see it because she's very sweet. She doesn't yell. She doesn't pinch or hit. She's not destructive, like on the outward side. When I call her, she comes running always with a smile. And so it was hidden from me for a very long time. And it's just that she's learned how to manipulate.
She has a very effective veneer.
Yeah. And as we've been holding her accountable, it's become very apparent to us, there's no attention deficit. She has agency to choose to be attentive if she wants to. There is no power. There is no deficit. There's no personality. There's no disorder. There's no that can take your agency from you. None. There's no such thing as having a disorder that robs you of your agency, ever.
I'm trying to be really clear with you that your child is not ADHD. They are a soul that needs to learn how to manage their physiology. Somebody just asked a question. Does that include children with intellectual disabilities or who have physical brain damage? So I want to bring up the story that all of us know about Helen Keller. The reason we know about Helen Keller is because there was a woman by the name of Annie Sullivan who did not tolerate Helen Keller's distortions. Now, Helen Keller was disabled, and back then she was very disabled. And the reason we don't know about other people who were disabled back then is because probably they were all enabled to stay in their disabled. But because this Annie Sullivan said, you can do this, you have the capability. And she taught her principles of truth. We know that. We know she taught her to be responsible. We know she was very honest with her about her ability. So this isn't about a one size fits all, other than the one size that fits all is you teach every child, you teach every adult, you teach everyone that's on the planet. I don't care how disabled they may look. that you expect them to be honest because you're modeling that like you're honest. Like you expect them to be honest about how they feel and what's going on. And then you expect them to be responsible for how they feel.
I don't have to sit here and tell you that pretending your child's ADHD isn't real opens up the door for a number of developmental issues that will need to be addressed at some point, just not by Ruby and Jodi, who deny such a problem even exists, evidently. While we're at it, let's also hear Jodi's thoughts on post-traumatic stress disorder, a condition that the American Psychiatric Association estimates at least 3.5% of Americans deal with. Going directly against the APA's definition, Jodi seems to write PTSD off as a means for people to simply hide behind their trauma and use it to their own advantage, which is certainly a take.
So I know that there is a title, there is an acronym called PTSD that the psychological community has created to give people who have had trauma permission to stay there. And like I said, people who want to be well and not allow that to affect them are willing to tell themselves the truth, and they do heal. And then there's others, and there's a lot of you out there that don't want to change. And you'll take offense at this. Everybody who takes offense at what I'm saying in this podcast are those people that I'm talking about that want to hide behind their trauma and use it. So you can keep your comments to yourself if you don't like what I'm saying. I already know where you're at.
Jodi's immediate hostility here towards anyone dealing with repressed trauma is kind of shocking to hear from a board-certified therapist. Her advice genuinely seems to boil down to just, hey, stop having trauma, quit it. According to her, if you're still dealing with trauma, it's because you must be choosing it. Maybe because you like being a victim. Who knows? I don't know.
Maybe you like being a victim. Maybe you like the attention you get from being a victim. I don't know what your particular case is, but the question was, if I have PTSD and I keep getting triggered, is that a distorted fear? And the answer is yes. You do not have to walk around being injured from the past. You just don't have to do that. And I'm not being cold or callous or trying to be insensitive. I've had so much trauma in my life and I have healed all of it. If you're having triggers and you're going back into that same thing, you are engaging in self-deception, and you need to figure out why you're doing that, because you're getting something out of it. And that may sound uncaring on my part, but it is the truth. You're getting something. People are giving you attention. You seem injured or wounded. Maybe you get a paycheck from somebody, the government, because you're in disability. I don't know, but you're getting things.
Look, I'm not a therapist or anything, but I know the term PTSD doesn't exist as a mechanism to give people permission to feel trapped. It's a legitimate condition that nobody asks for. Nobody enjoys dealing with it, obviously. But Jodi implying otherwise, it tells you a lot about how she perceives victims. Keeping with the victim shaming theme, in another video, Ruby goes on to ask what someone could have done to put themselves in a position to get assaulted.
If you end up pregnant, then you had sex first. Or if you were pregnant, you were taken advantage of. And what did you do to put yourself in this situation where you're being taken advantage of? So
really great mental health fitness training going on here, I gotta say. Just like in this clip where Ruby suggests what to do when your child has an eating disorder.
She just knows she's getting a hit by not eating, and she's getting a hit by lying about it. And you are so easily fooled that you go along with it. So what you need to do is get big and say, no, I know exactly what's going on here. I will not be lied to. And then her world needs to get really, really small. I don't know if she's involved in a friend group. I don't know if she's part of any extracurricular group. I don't know if she's doing after school things. I don't know what she's involved in, but you need to know more about where your daughter is. I would get her off of the smartphone, off of the phone, off of the internet. They are sources of distortion and lust. Your daughter is being very controlling. This is a control issue. She's trying to control her identity. She's trying to control her pain. She's trying to control her who she is.
First of all, making Edie out to be something a child chooses and that they must be held accountable for lying to the parent is so antithetical to working through their condition alongside them. You cannot tell me it's healthy or beneficial to cut your child off from outside influences, shrink their world, and restrict their friend group, especially when they're struggling with something as serious as ED. That's not looking out for them. You're just making things infinitely harder. You're ignoring the problem by suggesting there's some ulterior motive at play. And to call the child controlling? What is she controlling?
You are responsible for your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. That's it. And you're responsible to teach your child the same. You are responsible to be honest and humble and take accountability. That's it. When one of the reasons you're feeling overwhelmed is because you're not understanding the choice and accountability piece. You're scared to hold your child accountable. How do I know that? Because of what you're going to ask in the third question, which I have not shared with you yet. But this mother is very intimidated by her children. I don't know your children. I don't know how they're reacting, but they are responding in distortion. And that could be they're giving you the cold shoulder, they're yelling at you, they're being grumpy, they're refusing to give affection, they're holding their affection hostage unless you, the mom, do what I'm telling you to. You're being canceled in your own home. Your own children are canceling you.
I mean, when it's not wholeheartedly depressing, some of the stuff is just ridiculous. I mean, you expect me to take your parenting advice seriously when these are the kinds of words you use? There's nothing clinical about any of what these people are saying. A lot of the time, it's just whatever bad and neglectful parents want to hear. Saying things like, it's not a parent's job to make their child happy or successful or give them a magical childhood.
Your job is not to provide them with a magical childhood. I'm going to do a video on that coming up, magical childhoods. Your job is not to make sure that your children are accepted by their peers or that they have friends or birthday parties or Christmas presents or like the list of things that people think children need today are astronomical and very unrealistic.
And while it is necessary for children to learn certain life skills in order to develop independence, that's usually done more gradually than what Ruby and Jodi assert. And with the information we know now about Ruby's neglect, it's impossible for me to sit here and watch these videos without any alarm bells going off. In context to the arrest, these principles seem to be a way for Ruby to justify her horrendous behavior more than anything else.
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to spend the day with Jodi? Come spend 2 days with us in southern Utah hiking, jet skiing, engaging in training sessions, and one-on-one coaching. Or spend 2 days with us in Lake Havasu enjoying training sessions, one-on-one coaching, good food, and boating. Go deeper, quicker with this life-on-life training where you will be spending all day and evening with Jodi and myself, getting the help that you need.
Hey! Hey! Let me in!
Is someone running circles around you in your life? Jodi's running circles around me.
She says it's all gonna be good. She wouldn't throw Pam off. She'll throw me though. Huh?
It's pretty evident to me that Jodi was beginning to rub off on Ruby. The more she sort of mentored her as this mental health fitness trainer, I will never get over that title, just seemed to further delude Ruby in a way that those around her began to notice. Specifically the rest of her family who have opposed Jodi and Connections from the very beginning. Ruby's sister Julie, a fellow family vlogger, recently took to her channel to explain things from her own perspective.
We all felt weird about this Jodi lady. We weren't comfortable with it. We didn't like it. We didn't like the teachings Ruby was bringing to the family functions, and we were this close to telling her, if you come to our family events anymore, we do not want to hear what you were learning through Connections because we don't like it. 3 years ago, Ruby and I hung out bottling tomatoes, and then a few weeks later, crap hit the fan and she left the family.
According to Julie, it got to a point where Ruby was cutting herself off from anyone she perceived to be living in distortion, even those in her own family.
She didn't even call me to say, hey, you know, Julie, you're doing this and this, and I don't like it. You're living your life in distortion, so I'm gonna have to take some time away from you. No, literally nothing.
Which aligns with the testimony from another one of Jodi's clients, Stephanie Jones, who told NBC, the theory was that if you're meeting with Jodi, then you are all living in truth, and so she doesn't want you talking to anyone else about your problem. She wanted you talking to people that were also living in truth. So this is where I started to feel it kind of got cult-like. She wanted everything to stay in the group. You're not allowed to have a different opinion than her.
She did call my mom and yelled at my mom on the phone for 45 minutes and accused her of things that were not true. She was trying to grab at anything she could, and she would exaggerate on everything. It was almost as if Ruby had been making up memories from her childhood.
This is something I found to be particularly interesting, especially when we factor in the testimony recently given by Jodi's niece, Jodi Hildebrandt, providing even further disturbing insight into the real-life consequences of what Connections can bring.
You were also under her care at one point, right?
Yeah, I was left in her care when I was a teenager. for a little under a year.
To understand the full context of Jodi Hildebrandt's story, it's important to note their upbringing wasn't always the easiest. At 15, Jodi was struggling a lot with mental health problems, and on top of that, they were growing up in a Mormon house, gay. This tension allowed emotions to run a little high, and Jodi wasn't unfamiliar with getting into fights with their parents. And Jodi's parents weren't always the most reasonable when it came to punishments. For example, in this 3-hour interview with the Mormon Stories podcast, Jodi describes being grounded for 3 months after committing the cardinal sin of having a MySpace account.
2008, 2009. I'm a sophomore in high school, and I am very sad and I'm very angry, and I started getting into a lot of really intense fights with my family. Punishments were always so extreme in my family to things that, like, when I compared it to like things my friends were doing, that would just get little slaps on the wrist.
To have your entire life upended because you got into a fight with your mom at a family gathering is a bit of an extreme repercussion, I'd argue. Yet this is exactly what landed Jodi in the primary care of their dad's sister, Jodi, for a little over a year in high school.
My grandparents lived in Linden, Utah. They had a 50th wedding anniversary party, and we were staying at Jodi's. So we were only supposed to be there like 3 days, I believe, like a very short trip. We drove out, we were gonna drive back. I get into a fight with mom. I go downstairs, lock myself in the basement. It's 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, maybe even later. All I know is that Jodi and my parents had a conversation. Jodi told them to leave me with her and for them to just go and to not say anything and to just pack up the things and just go. And so a few hours later, I get a knock on the door. I was asleep, and it was Jodi and my grandparents telling me that my family had left and I wasn't going with them, and that my life was about to change pretty dramatically.
At this point, Jodi was a very successful therapist with a big house in American Fork, Utah, and a striking reputation among the church. Unfortunately, Jodi was also an extremely calculated and persuasive force, and when Jodi ended up living at her house while being counseled by Jodi, which is already an extreme breach of ethics, unfortunately, things only worsened from there. As Jodi describes, Jodi has a tendency to latch onto whatever quality might be readily available in a patient as a means to get inside their head and manipulate them. She feeds on insecurities as a control tactic, and in the case of Jodi specifically, she saw an angry teenager ripe for indoctrination.
She saw me as an angry teenager, and so she's like, I could use this. Like, oh, you're angry because you're evil. You're sad because you have so much sin inside of you. Oh, you've kissed girls. Oh my God, you are just Satan himself. And I don't say this hyperbolically. Like, she genuinely believed, literally believed, that Satan was working through me. And she literally believed that Jesus was working through her, and that she was fighting Satan on a daily basis. I mean, I believed it. I was like, you're right. I must be this horrific. And I was already believing I was evil because I was gay. And so like she plays into things that are already there. She finds the hot point and then drills into it.
Poisoning Jodi's 16-year-old mind with such black and white ideals that left no room for compassion and didn't bother to consider or understand Jodi's perspective. In Jodi's mind, Satan himself was literally working through her niece, and he needed to be expelled through what she coined spiritual surgery.
But she would say, like, we have to do these extreme things because this is spiritual surgery. And that's how she would rationalize it, is that it has to be extreme because we are surgically removing the sin. We're surgically removing the sin from your soul. We're surgically removing Satan from you.
See, Jodi says that Jodi would have these visions and dreams of God coming to her in her sleep and telling her Jodi was engaging in a whole variety of behavior that wasn't actually true. Jodi was convinced Jodi had had abortions, was a drug addict, a sex addict, a masturbation and porn addict, all while in reality, Jodi was still a virgin, had never touched drugs, never seen porn. In fact, Jodi never even knew that someone with their anatomy could masturbate.
But Jodi also was convinced that I was a drug addict. She was convinced I was a sex addict. She was convinced that I had abortions. At the time, like, I had never done drugs. I had never had anything close to sex. She was convinced I was also masturbating. I had a masturbation problem. I didn't even know female anatomy people could masturbate. I didn't even know that. She was convinced of so many insane beliefs. She would rationalize and validate these types of behaviors through dreams and visions. She would have these dreams that like, God came to her and told her that I had had an abortion. And so no matter what I said, I was a liar.
Jodi remained convinced that everything that came out of her niece's mouth was a lie. And while none of Jodi's suspicions were rooted in anything legitimate, even if they were, it certainly wouldn't justify the inhumane level of cruelty and child abuse Jessi endured at Jodi's hand. And I will say before we go any further, there is a massive trigger warning here for physical violence, emotional manipulation, and religious trauma, so please feel free to skip to the time frame on screen now if you'd rather not hear the details. Jodi was so convinced that her niece was lying to her that she felt the need to physically duct tape Jessi's mouth shut as a visual reminder of their sins.
She was convinced that every word that came out of my mouth was a lie. And that, gave her rationale to put duct tape on my mouth. And that's why I was always duct taped, because every word I said was a lie. And that needed to be physically reiterated as a reminder that everything I say is a lie.
In this interview, Jessi describes being forbidden from speaking to anyone without Jodi's permission. This included people at the church who were becoming increasingly worried about Jessi's condition.
I wasn't allowed to speak to my parents. I wasn't allowed to speak to anyone alone. If I was at church and I wasn't duct taped, and a church leader came in, because this happened, a church leader would come and be like, "Are you okay?" And I would have to just stare at them. People in the church in my ward started becoming very nervous about what was going on. They were becoming very concerned with just my physical, what I was looking like.
But after a few people voiced their concerns with a bishop, that bishop then turned around and gave Jodi the names and information of those who had spoken up, so that Jodi could then take Jessi to meet with them and explain that everything was totally fine, forcing her niece to apologize for worrying them.
Bishop went to Jodi and gave her the names of these people. I had to go around, we drove to all these people's homes, and she sat me in the car. She told me exactly what I was going to say to these people. And I would go in and I would have to apologize to them for manipulating them into thinking that something was wrong. That Jodi was actually saving my life. And it sounds ridiculous to say now, but at the time it's I said Jesus is working here.
You have to understand, Jodi's whole modalities that certain conditions like depression, anxiety, or OCD all stem from shame, which she believes results from sin. And because her niece wasn't getting any better, that meant Jessi was still holding on to some kind of sin that they weren't confessing.
Because I undiagnosed ADHD, I even sitting here, I constantly moving and tapping my foot, or that she would talk about, okay, if you're tapping your foot, it's because your body is full of so much shame. There's nowhere else for it to go. So it comes out in these sort of tics. She talked about OCD and how OCD was a result of shame, and that your body is so full and your spirit are so full of shame that it has nowhere else to go. So it overflows into these neuroses, and shame is a result of sin. What she did is, because I wasn't getting better, I was getting worse, is that there was still sin in me that wasn't coming out, that I hadn't confessed yet.
Jodi being so hell-bent on getting more confessions out of Jessi, though, only meant the punishments would become gradually more intense and unusual over time. For example, because Jodi was convinced her niece was addicted to masturbating, she wouldn't allow Jessi any time completely alone, requiring the door to stay open when Jessi went to the bathroom and timing how long they could shower. They also weren't allowed to use tampons because Jodi was so afraid of Jessi using them to masturbate.
I was also not allowed to use tampons because she was convinced I was masturbating with them.
Jodi would constantly reiterate that her ultimate goal with all of this was to make Jessi so physically uncomfortable that it forced the sin out, which involved Jessi sleeping outside in the snow, being locked in a cramped room with no doors or windows, being made to write their sins down over and over on a piece of paper, only for Jodi to come in and accuse them of hiding more sins from her.
And again, I believed all this. I believed this fully, so I was like, oh, there must be more in me. I'm trying to think. I'd be like, oh, one time I lied to my best friend Scotty. And these are the types of things I'm writing out. And then she would come back in, take that paper, read it to me, make me get on my hands and knees and beg for forgiveness as she read this back to me. And then she was like, no, this isn't it. This is not it. This isn't all. There's more. There's more. There's more. And there wasn't. And I would start making things up because I was like, I don't know. And because she was convinced there was more, things got worse and worse and worse.
There were times where Jessi was forced to sleep on a love seat, on the floor, out on the balcony, all at the peak of winter, mind you. It got so bad that Jessi would literally fantasize about going to the hospital or jail, since anything was better than spending another second with Jodi.
It was so bad that I would fantasize about jumping off the balcony and breaking my legs or stabbing myself, because I was like, going to the hospital would be better than this.
Jessi ran away a total of 3 times, only to end up right back up at Jodi's house twice. One of the times they went to a neighbor's house, to which Jodi later punished Jessi by blindfolding them, tying them up, and throwing them into her car before driving out to the middle of nowhere and forcing them to run sprints up and down a mountain for hours. This was their punishment for merely attempting to get help. And by the end of it, Jodi was showering her with praise and love as a way to reaffirm this harrowing cycle of abuse.
And she drove for what felt like hours into the mountains. My other grandparents, not my dad's parents, but my mom's parents, parked, I found this out afterwards, were parked at the base of the mountain to make sure I didn't run away. And she had me run up and down for 6 hours, up and down and up and down. And the other part about this type of abuse that I don't think is talked about as much is that 90% of the time you're evil and horrible and wrong, and the abuse is almost unbearable. But then there are moments where you're rewarded and you are now the best thing in the world. And so after these 6 hours of running up and down, the reward that Jodi gave me of acceptance of like, you did it, you did the thing. The abuse was so extreme, but then if you would bear it, then you would get these moments of immense reward from her.
Another time though, Jessi escaped and went to a police station, corroborated by a police report recently obtained by KSL TV. According to the report, the minor described Hildebrandt as mean and very strict, sharing examples including claims that Hildebrandt forced the niece to sleep in a sleeping bag outside of Hildebrandt's home, only allowed them to shower for 7 minutes at a time, at one point placed duct tape over the minor's mouth to prevent the teen from talking, and limited their clothing. The teen shared they had been wearing the same clothes for 3 weeks and were not enrolled in school. The juvenile also told police Hildebrandt called them a liar and said they were going to be a cheap hooker one day. But when asked whether they were being physically abused, Jessi told the police no, and that Jodi's actions were her methods of counseling. Jessi's answer here clearly is a result of someone being so physically and mentally worn down and lied to for so long that they basically have no idea what to believe anymore. Jessi had been repeatedly told by Jodi that they were a bad person, and that's why they were getting this kind of methods of counseling. So of course, it's not totally unusual for a minor to say that they aren't being abused in this instance. While Jodi didn't initially respond to the police's attempts to reach her, Jessi's dad claimed his child contacted the police as a ploy to get out of attending a wilderness camp he was planning on sending them to. And in response to Jessi's claim about sleeping out in the snow, he assured that only occurred one time. It was a way to show Jessi what it would be like to sleep outside. The report goes on to confirm the police then transferred Jessi to a local home-like facility meant to be a safe place for teenagers, where Jessi remained for 2 weeks before Jodi finally reached out to the police herself looking for her niece. When the police confronted Jessi back at the shelter, the report notes that Jessi was very surprised at being located and was visibly upset, crying and shaking and looking around as if with the intent to run. Thankfully, arrangements were then made to assure Jessi went back to her grandparents' house as opposed to Jodi's. And while waiting for the grandparents to arrive, Jessi revealed to police that they ran away because she tried to break them down, stating Jodi is some kind of therapist and thinks she has all the answers, but Jodi insults me all the time in front of others and acts like I'm evil by not letting me talk to her kids or to others. Interestingly, despite all of this mess and Jessi physically having to escape her imprisonment, the police somehow neglected to file a report with Child Protective Services. The police chief telling KSL TV, "I'm thinking that it never got disseminated to to DCFS. I'm going to own it. If we didn't send it, we didn't send it. Adding, it's hard when these disciplinary things happen, like duct tape or, sleeping outside. That's situational. I do understand why this was closed out. It's because Jessi alleged that there was no physical abuse happening in the home. I do wish we would have taken the time to dive in a little bit further into the case. And frankly, you have to wonder what could have happened had they followed through on their responsibility to dive a little bit further into the case. Maybe Jodi would have lost her license a lot sooner and permanently. Who knows? Maybe she wouldn't have been able to get away with breaking down so many clients over the years. Maybe she wouldn't have continued to gain such power and influence within the church. Maybe we wouldn't be here a decade later, having to witness the continued abuse directly perpetuated by her principals. Maybe we wouldn't have turned on the news to see this.
We turn now to the parenting influencer charged with child abuse. Ruby Franke is set to appear in court today, and we're now hearing the 911 call that led to her arrest.
On August 30th, 2023, a man living in the Ivins, Utah area called 911. An emaciated 12-year-old boy had just shown up at his doorstep begging for food and water. Evident by the duct tape wrapped around his ankles and wrists, the young boy appeared to have been imprisoned, as the neighbor told police. He was so struck by the child's physical state, in fact, that he eventually broke down in tears over the phone.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help, and he's said he just came from a neighbor's house, and he's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty. He has duct tape around each ankle. Yeah, there's sores around them. Oh, and he has them around his wrists as well. Okay, this boy has been... This kid has obviously been... I think he's been detained. He's obviously covered in wounds.
The child then revealed himself to be the son of Ruby Franke, and that he had just escaped the home of Jodi Hildebrandt through a window. He specifically asked not to see either of his parents, as he continued to blame himself for what had happened to him.
He says what's happened to him is his fault. Is Jodi up there right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Jodi Hildebrandt is up there right now. So she may come looking for him here soon, but she's a bad lady. We didn't realize how bad.
Subsequent court documents state that the boy had deep lacerations from being tied up with rope and from his malnourishment, and was transferred to a nearby hospital. Upon searching Jodi's home, law enforcement found Ruby's 10-year-old daughter in a similar state of malnourishment. Although she refused treatment at first, she too was taken to the hospital after a few hours. Ruby's two other daughters were soon found at the home of a woman named Pam Botcher, another top member of Connections listed directly above Ruby on their website. As evident by this body cam footage, American Fork police interrogated her for about 90 minutes, where they learned that Pam had picked them up when Ruby notified her of a family emergency. After being detained for about 50 minutes without being read her Miranda rights, Springfield police arrived and gave the two sisters a choice to either go to a youth center or stay with Sherry. Thankfully, they chose Sherry. As for their siblings found at Jodi's home, authorities allege those two children were under Jodi's direct care at the time of the incident, and that Ruby had knowledge of the malnourishment, abuse, and neglect due to the fact that she had just been in a video posted at the Connections channels, which placed Ruby at Jodi's home just a few days prior to her son escaping. But by the time Ruby was arrested, she was already back at her home in Springville, Utah, nearly 4 hours away.
Exclusive body cam footage obtained by ABC News shows when police with guns drawn go room to room inside Franke's Utah home after her 12-year-old son allegedly escaped Jodi Hildebrandt's home and ran to a neighbor who called 911.
In police documents that have recently been obtained by the media, the 12-year-old boy told officers that Jodi would put cayenne pepper on wounds caused by being tied with rope, and that the rope was used to tie the child to the ground. In one of 3 search warrants served between August 30th and August 31st, officers found 2 used medical gauze dressings near cayenne pepper and honey paste in the basement of Jodi's home, in addition to Scott's tape and saran wrap. Police also found papers, notes, a journal, 2 bowls containing a red liquid with a metal spoon, 2 super absorbent dressings, 2 bandages, 4 white ankle socks, 3 sets of a brown and white rope, 2 handcuffs, and 3 carabiners. The second and third search warrants involved the confiscation of several iPhones and MacBooks.
My case is assigned to Judge Barnes. I would make an oral motion today to transfer this case to Judge Walton so that co-defendants track each other.
The judge granted a switch of Franke's judge to be the same as Hildebrandt's. The 2 will continue to be held without bond.
After being denied bail on the 7th of September, Jodi and Ruby's next court appearance was moved from September 21st to sometime in October, with Utah County officials citing additional time needed to review copious amounts of discovery. It was also recently revealed the police responded to Ruby's Springville home a grand total of 15 times between the years 2019 and 2023. One visit from September 2022 was prompted after Sherry, who was moved out at this time, received word from neighbors that her mother had left her younger siblings home alone for days on end while visiting Jodi. Police records show that officers could see the children inside the home, but nobody came and answered the door. Police returned 4 more times that year along with Child Protective Services, though because of confidentiality laws, DCFS is unable to share further information about those visits. All we know is that neighbors have shown a lot of concern for the Franke children, calling DCFS a number of times over the years. After police finally searched the house, one neighbor was quoted saying, "Everyone is just breathing a collective sigh of relief because we thought they were going to come out of that house with body bags."
Hi, my name is Sherry Franke. My 4 younger siblings are living in Springville, and my neighbors have been telling me that they have been left home alone for about 4 or 5 days.
In the wake of these 2 being thrown into, again, purgatory, I really can't believe that's the name, many members of the Franke family have since spoken up, including Ruby's eldest daughter, Sherry, who immediately after her mother's arrest made these 2 posts to Instagram. One simply captioned, "Finally," and the other reading, "Today has been a big day. Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS for years about this, and so glad they finally decided to step up, confirming that children were finally safe," along with attaching this Google Doc meant to archive all of Ruby and Jodi's worst moments from Connections and 8 Passengers, which I've linked down below. Ruby's 3 sisters also made a joint Instagram post the day the news broke, stating, "For the last 3 years, we've kept quiet on the subject of our sister Ruby Franke for the sake of her children. Behind the public scene, we have done everything we could to try and make sure the kids were safe. We wouldn't feel right about moving forward with regular content without addressing the most recent events. Once we do, we will not be commenting on it further. Ruby was arrested, which needed to happen. Jodi was arrested, which needed to happen. The kids are now safe, which is the #1 priority." Going on to emphasize this overall sentiment, Ruby's younger sister Bonnie then uploaded a 9-minute video 2 weeks later titled, "I am not my sister, I am not my sister's crimes," to her channel of 1.4 million subscribers.
I know that my words will be used against me. I also know that my words may help people understand me a little. I can only speak for myself, and I will only be speaking for myself.
Bonnie begins by providing a little more context and reasoning behind why she and the rest of her sisters had not spoken about Ruby publicly for the past 3 years, stating that some of it had to do with the fact that Ruby had simply cut them off, describing how hard it was for their mother, who was so distraught by being alienated, she had a heart attack.
Ruby and Kevin cut our family off, and eventually they cut Kevin's family off as well. And I thought that was going to end my mom. She literally had a heart attack. She went into kidney failure. Her body was shutting down because it broke her.
Bonnie insists that while they weren't aware of what was happening in the home after being cut off, their overall impression of Connections and Jodi was a negative one.
We did not know what they were doing because, like we said, we were cut off. We did not have access to anyone. My thoughts towards Ruby and Jodi and Kevin and Connections is that it was all bullcrap. I knew they were weird. I knew that they were off. I was not going to come out and publicly say that I don't like my sister and I don't like what she's doing and I think she's weird. That is what we kept quiet about.
It wasn't until around a year ago that Bonnie and the rest of Ruby's sisters were able to slowly reconnect with Sherry, which finally allowed them to see Ruby in a different light.
It wasn't until about a year ago when we were able to reconnect with Sherry. And it was then that we were learning slowly bits and pieces of more.
She then goes on to assert that they did everything they could behind the scenes to help the rest of the children as much as possible before going off on Kevin.
We did everything legally that we could do. And for those that were saying that they'd go in and bust down doors and do whatever it took to end up in jail, because from jail, I can't do anything. The one person that could have done something within his legal right was Kevin. We had zero contact with him. It was Kevin's job to check in on things, and he did not. So when I say that Ruby and Kevin and Jodi and Connections have been destroying our lives offline for the last 3 years, that is exactly what they've been doing.
Bonnie's aggression toward her brother-in-law has since been echoed by Kevin's own nephew, who recently told KSL TV he believes Kevin should be arrested too, or at the very least have neglect charges brought against him.
As sad as I am to say it, I think Kevin should be arrested too. Me and my dad have been having a hard time believing that he had zero contact with his family, that he had no idea that, you know, Ruby would leave them for long stretches of time. At the very least, I think he should be brought up on neglect charges, because that's not acceptable.
While I am personally unable to confirm how much Kevin truly knew about the abuse happening under Ruby and Jodi, I do have to reiterate that he has still not been charged with anything, at least at the time of me writing this. We know that he is actively pursuing custody of the remaining kids, despite not having any contact with them for the past 13 months, according to Kevin's own lawyer, who claims Ruby and Jodi essentially forced him out of the house on the basis that total alienation was the only way for them to save their marriage. This would distance him from the family, and by proxy, any abuse happening in that house from fall of 2022 onward. But Kevin's nephew continues to question that.
He at least had to have stayed in contact with Sherry, because he was part of overseeing her car and her student stuff at BYU. And so some of that had to have made its way through.
Kevin's lawyer did respond to Bonnie's claims, though, telling NBC, "I think she admits that she too was out of the loop and had not had any contact with the children herself. However, Kevin is more interested in reaching out to his children, family, and friends to heal the past trauma and events. Kevin is making an effort to rebuild and bridge these relationships rather than sling mud and point fingers. He is focused on doing what is best for his kids at this point, even if that means undergoing some introspection. None of that process, however, is going to be creating more distance between him and his family, including his extended family. He wishes Bonnie and her family well as we all travel down this path of healing." We also know from his lawyer that Kevin initially began sessions with Jodi for a supposed sex addiction. Apparently, it didn't take long for Jodi to suggest he leave the home, with Chad then moving in with him. Though upon deciding they were enabling each other, Jodi eventually instructed Chad to leave, in accordance with Jodi's belief that in order to fix a relationship, you must first break a relationship. From there, Kevin only spoke to Ruby when she reached out to him, roughly 3 or 4 times that year, according to the lawyer. He effectively cut off his entire family at the instruction of Jodi Hildebrandt, which has garnered various reactions. One concerned neighbor even going so far as to call Kevin negligent, claiming he decided to leave the house. Though once he finally left the house, we have no way of definitively proving what he was or wasn't aware of. His lawyer has repeatedly asserted he knew nothing about the abuse, but I don't think that absolves him of not checking in on them every once in a while. I mean, you're telling me he didn't even try to reach out to these kids for 13 months? That's a problem in itself. Though then again, it's not like this guy's ever been known for his amazing parenting skills. I mean, come on, this is the same dad who happily exploited his kids for ad revenue, made his son sleep on a beanbag chair for 8 months straight, allowed his kids to go hungry in his own house, sent Chad to a wilderness camp, and I especially don't think it's normal or rational for a father to be threatening his own children with lawsuits either. This is something that broke right as I was finishing up this script, but I couldn't leave it out. Upon learning Sherry had returned to their Springville home to pick up personal items like clothes for her sisters, journals, and passports following the police raid, Kevin, in his infinite wisdom, became weirdly determined to press charges against Sherry for burglary, along with the entire police department. He was just so excited wanted to sue somebody, even if he had no legal grounds to do so, as the police had to explain to him multiple times. According to police, Kevin stated that Sherry is not allowed in the home, and that he believes she entered unlawfully, and that he wants her charged with burglary. I again explained that they needed to get essential items of theirs that were in the home, which he did not seem to think was relevant. The complainant was informed that we would not be charging his daughter with anything, as her intent was not to deprive him of any items. She had previously been allowed in the home, and he had not been in the home for admittedly 13 months, as the officer continued, confirming they would not be filing charges against Sherry, and that would be considered a civil issue due to her intent not being to deprive him of the items. For some reason though, this was something he just couldn't wrap his head around, wrongly thinking at one point that Sherry was the one to bust their front door down when it was actually the police. Now, of course, Sherry later turned these items over to police, who returned them to Kevin, but even then, body cam footage shows he wasn't very pleased.
Yeah, explain to me again why this was not robbery.
Because it's a civil issue. You guys are family. She's been in the house before. You haven't been in the house in a year. She had interest in the items. She didn't take them with the intention to deprive you of them. So theft, that's the theft code. We have to prove intent to deprive you of the items. And that wasn't her intent in having them. So the detective sergeant said that we're not going to charge her for anything.
Okay. I'll have to do some more research on that.
You're welcome to do that. If you want to follow up with our detective, you can do so.
Yeah, he'll be here on Tuesday. His name's Sergeant McCoy.
I will say, the fact that Sherry specifically felt a need to remove her parents' passports from the home tells me something about what she expected her mother to do on the off chance she ever got out on bail. So, in my personal opinion, Kevin hasn't been coming across as the most considerate, responsible father he may want us to believe he is. I also think it's interesting his lawyer came out and made the blanket statement that Kevin has not physically abused the children. And not sure how I feel about that wording, but okay, you're the lawyer, not me.
So none of the things that the mother has been charged with happened when he was in the house.
That's correct.
One of the allegations is that the kid, Chad, wasn't allowed to sleep in a bed for 7 months. Why did he think that was okay?
I can't comment on that. I have a duty to my client, to the court, not to comment on that question.
But that would have been while he was there. That's all I'm saying. Did he have a different feeling about parenting that's changed at some point?
I'm not certain when that happened, but my client's was not around the children when this happened this summer. If the allegations are true, my client has never supported, condoned, or even acted in a physical way toward these kids.
Speaking of lawyers, Jodi's seems especially intense considering he's one of the only defense attorneys in the state of Utah capable of defending against the death penalty. Now, Jodi isn't facing the death penalty, obviously, but it does go on to underline how serious she understands these charges to be, and that she isn't exactly messing around by hiring the best defense her net worth could buy. Her attorney has also claimed that while in jail, Jodi faced a life-threatening medical emergency and was hospitalized for a few days. Ruby herself was also reportedly moved to the medical block as well, interestingly enough, and while we don't know the details behind what exactly happened to either of them, there's been no indication that they're still receiving intensive medical care, as Ruby was reportedly present at 2 standard custody hearings later in the month to decide what to do with her children while the trial is underway. Though this was a standard procedure, no cameras were allowed inside, so the information we have here is limited at best. So before going any further, I would just like to go ahead and issue a disclaimer that the following bit of information is currently impossible to confirm or deny due to the confidential nature of juvenile court. But because it's already been so widely reported and a lot of people have since taken it as fact, I think it's hard not to at least touch on this story in order to get a full grasp on what's been happening in the news. And again, there is a trigger warning here for assault, so please skip ahead to the time code on screen now if you feel so inclined. On September 8th, the Daily Mail reported that during a 30-minute custody hearing, Ruby made a series of allegations against her own children. According to this article, Ruby told the court that not only had one of her kids been looking at pornography since 3 years old, but that they had been sexually abusing a younger sibling for years, adding that eventually the 2 of them began to abuse other children. She also claimed that her 2 children played a patting game with each other, but did not go into further detail. Franke said that in May, her child confessed to sexually abusing 20 people, including cousins and neighbors. neighbors, going on to say she provided no proof for these claims, but that the judge decided her allegedly abusive child will then need to be placed in a home with no other children. These are obviously some pretty intense claims, especially for a mother to be making, but before we jump to any conclusions, I think it's only fair to understand where this story comes from. This is based off the testimony of a reporter who illegally snuck into the trial, as confirmed by Kevin's lawyer, and was then published by a man named Alan Butterfield, who has a history of reporting false information in the National Enquirer. Back in 2003, the paper paid 2 reporters from the Salt Lake City Tribune to disclose details on a kidnapping case. After being published by Butterfield, these details were contested by the victim's family, leading to a lawsuit and the 2 Tribune reporters being fired as a result of the information being proven false. They settled for an undisclosed amount, with the editor telling the Washington Post, "We're embarrassed as hell," before even he stepped down. Now, this one instance, of course, doesn't mean Butterfield is incapable of publishing an accurate story, but it does give me pause, considering there is currently no way to verify whether these details are accurate or not. As of now, not anyone, not even Kevin's lawyer, can legally discuss what was said because child shelter hearings suppress court filings, including transcripts. Not to mention, this has been the only source on the story at the time of me writing this, so again, I just don't personally feel comfortable treating this as fact right now with no responsible way to verify it. But by that same token, even if Ruby really did say these things about her children, it wouldn't be inconsistent with Jodi's reputation of weaponizing false accusations against patients in the past as well. At least according to countless testimonies ranging from Adam Paul Steed to Jodi's own niece.
And so to hear Ruby tell the world that her child is a sex addict, a predator, and has been addicted to porn since he was 3 years old, it just echoes exactly the things that she was telling me and telling everyone around me. She's saying that he even confessed to it. I also confessed to things that I didn't do as a way of trying to get the abuse to stop. That's what she would tell you. Like in the middle of the abuse, she'd be like, "I'll stop as soon as you tell me. As soon as you tell me what's going on, like what you did." So I just started making things up. And when I spoke to the detective down in St. George days ago, I told her that as well. And so even if he had confessed, it cannot be taken seriously. Jodi is the mastermind here, not Ruby. Ruby is still responsible and like should be arrested for harming her children for sure. And I'm sure Jodi used what it was already there, which is what she does. She uses what's already there to her advantage. Jodi is the one doing this. This is Jodi's therapeutic ideas. These are Jodi's ideas that she has been doing for over 14 years. This is not new. This is a pattern. I'm just so grateful that these children were taken out of custody from them, and that hopefully because of the validation and the repercussions that are happening to them, that their healing will be much faster than 14 years.
Now, of course, this case is still ongoing, but while the finer details have yet to be solidified, what we already know about Ruby and Jodi's past is more than enough to convince me that something needs to happen here. They can't just walk free, and I honestly don't think they will. The prosecutor for this case is the same guy who put Warren Jeffs, a notorious cult leader and serial abuser, behind bars for life, so the state of Utah clearly isn't holding back here. If what Ruby and Jodi were willing to show the public is any indication at all of their behavior behind closed doors, I can only imagine what the Franke children have been forced to endure in private for years. I'm afraid that what we've already seen is only the tip of the iceberg. Despite the myriad of disturbing clips that have surfaced over the years, we still only know very little regarding the daily lives of the Franke children, which is ironic considering how much they've had their privacy breached throughout their time on 8 Passengers. Ruby went out of her way to curate an image of purity and goodwill to her audience, while simultaneously subjecting her children to ghoulish conditions and grossly unfair punishments over the littlest of indiscretions. It's clear to me that Ruby never knew how to be a good parent, so she turned to Jodi for validation and reassurance that her style of tough love was correct and good all along. Ruby has always been wicked, but the way I see it, all of the evidence proves proves Jodi to be heavily instrumental in exacerbating all of the negative traits Ruby possessed. As evident by a decade-long reign of terror and a laundry list of victims, Jodi Hildebrandt is just as corrupt and dangerous as her counterpart Ruby, if not more so. And with the two of them feeding off of each other's vile tendencies, it's only natural for this to be the end result. I'm astonished that it's taken so long for the proper legal intervention to take place, but I'm also incredibly thankful that it finally has. These are some severe charges, and because Ruby and Jodi have insisted on literally publicizing so many damning clips of theirs online, I have a feeling prosecutors won't have any problem getting a conviction. I just hope Jodi can keep her morale up when she's finally sentenced.
I got all my life to live, and I got all my love to give, and I'll survive. I will survive.